Yep. All right. I'm seeing some thumbs up. And people, you can hear me as well. Okay. So I wanted to start with just a little bit of an exercise just to get us into the mood here. I should start by introducing myself. I'm Will Wiley. I'm one of the residents in psychiatry at UNM. I'm a second year. I may have seen some of you dropping folks off at PES or maybe just out in the community. But really, it's a pleasure to have this opportunity to talk today. This exercise, I'm going to read a brief passage. Just listen in. If you're familiar with this, give me a minute to finish before you jump in. So without further ado, I'd like to talk to you real quick about the Nakarima. The Nakarima are a North American group whose scattered living territory is bordered by the Canadian Cree in the north and the Yaqui and Tarahumari of Mexico in the south. Labto Off is performed by members of two villages who face each other in a ritual battle around a sacred fruit, a stuffed raisin. The raisin can be kicked, punched, and crushed, but never breaks. The warriors participating are entirely male and dress in a certain way. A headdress covers most of the head with holes in the front to enable a small field of vision. Other allowed gadgets are hidden in the mouth. Because of the violence of the fights, the warriors affix these objects on their headdresses so they won't swallow them and choke during battle. Before the warriors face off against each other, a small group ceremony is performed. Each village's warriors lean their headdresses on each other, while the chief speaks a prayer that is only for the ears of his subordinates, then orders them to make ready. The stance of the beginning is to stretch the legs, bow forward, and touch the earth. The warriors throw their heads back and send killing glances at the opponents. As soon as the high tone occurs, both armies run together with their heads and begin the battle over the stuffed raisin. It appears as if there are no rules, but Labtoaf is governed by a highly detailed set of laws. Is this familiar to anyone? Has anyone seen anything like this before?
The election, maybe?
Sure. Dr. Padilla, Detective Padilla, I think I saw some Labtoaf gear in the background of your video. I don't know if you're on mic. So this is football. This is the Nakarima are Americans, and Labtoaf is football. And I wanted to try to make the familiar unfamiliar to you, to bring everyone into this space where things that we take for granted every day are inexplicable, mysterious, difficult to understand. Because when it comes to folks with an autism spectrum disorder, in some ways that is what we are dealing with. These are people who have a deficit in the very skills that allow us to interact with each other and understand all those sort of that invisible back and forth between people. So thanks for your patience. Let's keep going here. So why are we talking about this? As you're no doubt aware, this is an ongoing issue for people with autism spectrum disorder. Encounters with law enforcement are an ongoing issue. A quick Google search reveals a whole number of really tragic headlines. Here's one from 2014. It's followed up about a year later by an individual that's actually killed by police. This is one from 2019. Here's 2020, just earlier this fall. And then I think it's important to point out, this isn't just a US problem. This is an international issue. And I think that kind of points to some of the challenges that law enforcement face when dealing with individuals who have this kind of diagnosis. So what is autism spectrum disorder? The diagnosis, it developed out of some observations. The first recorded set of cases that I could find was in 1943. I believe he was a child psychiatrist, was describing a set of kids who they had these, they just interacted with their families strangely. They didn't seem interested. They were very focused on other pursuits, inanimate objects. And they really just didn't show the type of development that was considered normal or typical. This is followed up in 1944. Hans Asperger described a similar set of children with a related but slightly different behaviors. And I think if you look in the text, there are some things that we already heard about in this case study. Uh, Speaking lack distance and speaking without shyness, even to strangers. Indifferent to social norms. So these descriptions eventually coalesced into a couple of diagnoses, which have been developing along with the multiple iterations of the diagnostic manual. So by the time we get around to DSM-5, the main the criteria, the A and B criteria are the ones that are really they make the diagnosis here. So this first one is about deficits in social communication. And this is not just in one particular instance. This isn't somebody who has trouble speaking to someone they have a crush on or doesn't pay attention in school. These are across multiple contexts. Somebody who can't talk to family members, can't talk to crushes, can't talk to people in stores. It's present in a variety of situations, and the amount of deficit will change with the individual. The second criteria for diagnosis is the restricted patterns of behavior and interests and activities. So in our case, this individual was very interested in sports. And it sounds like would sort of gravitate towards that, didn't necessarily branch out as much. Other than that, we have some pretty common DSM criteria here. The early developmental period, this is important to note. We'll talk about epidemiology in a second, but this is a lifelong condition. It emerges in early childhood, but later on it may be harder to discern as individuals develop skills to get by. And so that's something that's important, and I think especially relevant for our discussion today. And then this is in pretty much every diagnosis. It has to have a clinically significant impairment, and it's not better explained by a different disorder. Although I should point out that, especially with intellectual disability, IDD, it's often comorbid with autism spectrum disorders. We'll speak a little bit more about that later. So today, I really wanted to focus on this first criterion because this from my perspective, is where a lot of the issues interacting with law enforcement come from. It's these deficits in social communication and interaction. I think that's part of what makes their lives and many of your jobs so difficult. So we'll come back to that in a minute. In terms of the prevalence, how common is this? So estimates range from about 0.5% to about 2% of the population, changes varying on the study. The diagnosis was first described in 1966, and the surprise, surprise, the rates of diagnosis have been increasing since then. I'm making a joke out of it, but I think there is a little bit of fun speculation that we could engage in there. Males are more commonly diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder, and there's some thought that this may have to do with the disorder itself. The other option is that it might be our own biases. We're more likely to diagnose it in males, and some studies have shown that women who are diagnosed with ASD have more significant impairments and are more likely to have a co-occurring intellectual disability. So this question of the increasing prevalence, and I've included a graph here, you can see that it's going up as time goes on. So it's possible that this is just the effect of education and recognition of the disorder. It's also possible that something else is going on. One thing that I thought of when I was thinking about this is that allergies are also on the rise, and there is some evidence that the immune system has a role to play in autism. So, one might speculate that, for example, with the hygiene hypothesis, the idea that as we become as there's this greater focus on hygiene, our immune systems don't have anything to do, and so they throw up allergies. potentially it's also contributing to neurologic conditions like ASD. That's complete speculation. I haven't seen it anywhere. I haven't done any research on that, but just one of the things that's kind of fun to think about. Why is it becoming more common? So what's the etiology? What causes autism spectrum disorder? This is a genetic condition, and it's you. But there's an interaction with environment. So there are many associated genes. There's no single autism gene. All of the different gene variants have varying levels of contributions to the overall susceptibility. And I thought one thing that's notable is these are the genes that are involved they play a role in really basic cellular functions. So I put this chart up not to terrify anyone or scare you off if you didn't like high school biology, but just to point out that these are sort of the housekeeping functions of a gene. So RNA is the mechanism by which cells make proteins from their DNA. Every cell in your body is doing that. Histones are the proteins that DNA is wrapped around. They call it a beads on a string. Every cell in your body has that, except for red blood cells, but that's outside the scope of this discussion. So these are really basic cellular functions. And for such a complex neurologic disorder to be arising out of these sort of baseline genetic variability is pretty interesting. Our current model for understanding the disease is it develops when someone has a genetic susceptibility. They have enough of these gene variants that makes them open to developing ASD. And then there's some kind of environmental trigger that will result in the development of this syndrome. And that could be in utero. Exposure to certain medications has been linked with the development of ASD. It could be in early childhood. It's really impossible to say, and it's a very difficult experiment to run. You can't really do that. Sorry. The other thing to point out here is when you do have a disease that's caused by such a complex interactions of genes and environment, many different genes, this is the kind of model that gives rise to the spectrum, the wide variety of presentations of this disorder. I gave a little spoiler here by accident. What about vaccines? I figured I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention this. I see Shannon's shaking her head. This is, it's so frustrating. Anyway, so this idea came out of a 1998 article. It was published in The Lancet, the British medical journal. It suggested a link between the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine and the development of an autism spectrum disorder in 12 children. Very splashy, got a lot of headlines, got a lot of attention. Unfortunately, or fortunately, really, so 10 of the 13 authors on that study retracted their claims in 2004. The Lancet retracted the paper in 2010. And an independent investigation of the paper and its methods found really serious issues with it. For example, some of the children were showing signs of neurological dysfunction before they received the vaccine, which sort of weakens their point. The retractions are really, I mean, it's hard to overstate how serious that is in the sort of the scientific community. It's sort of like disavowing it. I mean, it's, taking your name off something. In addition to issues with the original paper, many studies since then have found no link, including one that looked at, it was a meta-analysis that included about 2 million children. This was published just this year. And then on the other side of things, there haven't been any really strong bits of corroborating evidence presented within the scientific community. So this is something that it was claimed in a small study, which was then discredited and retracted. It got a lot of media and public attention, some people who were seeking answers why their child might be autistic, and kind of picked up on the vaccine story. But the important thing is there's no scientific evidence for a link here. Vaccines are great, they save lives. All right. So this is a phrase from the DSM. Autism spectrum disorder, it's characterized by atypical neural connectivity rather than dysfunction in particular brain regions. So unlike something like an aphasia, where the Broca or Wernicke area of the brain, a specific language center is affected, this is really a global problem. And that and so I wanted to talk briefly about one model of how this how we get from genes to connectivity to the manifestations that you might see. So we talked about the gene variants. One other consequence of the genes being involved being so at such a basic level of cellular function is that there are many possible downstream effects. So it could be the gene that's associated could be one of the ones that wraps DNA around histones, but then if it wraps it too tightly and the cell can't make proteins from that section of DNA, you could have 5 or 6 other genes that have no difference in their in the actual code, but they could be expressed at a lower level or too much or too little. So it has kind of a rippling cascade effect. It also, the gene variants interact with the environment in different ways. The environment is crucial for driving gene expression. And this is also down to the level of 2 cells talking to each other. So they may just respond, the cells might respond strangely to the environment. This leads to differences in neural connectivity. Neurons have their little dendrites and axons, and they connect at the little synapses. If you don't have the proteins that maintain those synapses, or perhaps you don't have the enough of the neurotransmitter at that synapse, you start to lose the type of signaling that's integral to cognitive function. And that brings us to this next bullet here: cell survival and function. So neurons are responsive to that kind of the signals that they get. They're strengthening connections. They're making new connections. If there's an issue with the synapses, they can't connect the way they usually do, and that actually changes which cells survive, which ones how they work within the context of the brain. There's another arm to this, which is the immune system we mentioned before. Those same genes that are maybe changed in the brain of somebody who has autism are also different in their immune system. And so when the immune system interacts with the environment, you may actually see changes in the microglia, the immune system of the central nervous system, or potentially other mechanisms. And so this is it's a theory that's out there. The incorporation of immune inflammation or other things. And so I just wanted to put that in there. The same genes could be active in the brain. They could also be active in your immune system. And once we put all this together, we see these profound changes, sometimes profound, sometimes subtle changes in cognition and behavior. And this is present at all different levels of observation. So I've included half of a coronal section here. There's a little bit of the temporal lobe is blown out for us to see. That purple around the edge, those are the cell bodies. Folks with autism spectrum disorder have differences in sometimes the number of cells, the types of cells that can be observed. We're still trying to figure out what are real differences, what are and what might just be artifact. And then I included this diagram. This is a picture of the most important white matter tracts, the sort of the information or the transatlantic cable system for your brain. These are the pathways by which information is flowing through the brain. And again, this is another level at which the manifestations of this condition are really manifest. So, all right, what do we do about this? How do we help folks who have this? The interventions fall into 2 buckets, really: behavioral and pharmacologic. Behavioral is really the most effective. The 2 general approaches are comprehensive versus targeted. A comprehensive approach would try to raise somebody's global functioning help them be more independent. That relates to the physical therapy and the assessments that a couple of folks were talking about during our case presentation. And then the other modality is a targeted intervention. So for example, if somebody has really a lot of difficulty, I don't know, making eye contact, you could have a targeted intervention there. Or something more realistic, maybe they can't cook for themselves and they can't live independently. Targeting that process of planning a meal and cooking it, that's the targeted intervention. When it comes to medications, we don't have anything that's really effective. We can't address the underlying cause. We don't have something that can change somebody's genetics in this case. And so the role for medications is pretty limited. The FDA approvals are for repetitive behaviors, and then some of the management of more difficult behaviors, especially like aggression towards others. Some individuals will self-harm, and so that's where we start looking for the meds. A couple of antipsychotics are approved, not all of them. And then serotonin reuptake inhibitors, antidepressants also approved, again, for these limited interventions. They're targeting the repetitive behaviors. And then stimulants are also approved for the treatment of ADHD, which is a commonly co-occurring disorder for folks with ASD. Some experimental therapies, you may have heard of oxytocin. It's the love hormone. It's released in a variety of social settings. When you hug someone you care about, during breastfeeding, orgasm, and I think also during childbirth. Some researchers are looking into oxytocin as a way of building or supplementing the process of building social connections for people with ASD. Still under investigation. It's not approved. But I thought it was worth mentioning as a potential intervention. What are the goals of therapy? Why are we doing this? So I think the first one is, it sounds really simple, and in a way it is. The goal is always to improve the independence of someone who has ASD, and then obviously improve their quality of life. The second one is a little, I don't know, made me feel good reading about it. It's kind of a nice reminder. A lot of folks who have, or some folks who have ASD also are very skilled in certain areas. And so another goal of therapy should be identifying those strengths that they have and making sure they can fulfill their potential with them. And so taken together, and for our purpose here, the goals of therapy means that for people who do learn to overcome some of their challenges, it means that they could be living anywhere. You could meet somebody who has a diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder anywhere in the community. They could be living independently. They could be living with their parents. They could be able to have a whole conversation without issue. They could be almost nonverbal. This kind of brings out the variability in this diagnosis. And then finally, it's just important to remember that even folks who have some kind of diagnosis like this, they have their own talents, they have their own desires and wishes and dreams. And so helping them to identify things that are that can be developed is important, and I think sometimes gets missed when we really pathologize and sort of focus on issues of weakness rather than strength. So what are some of the challenges that come up with this for law enforcement? So I said I would focus on the communication and interaction. I would be interested to hear about other areas which present challenges, but for me, I thought that this was probably where a lot of the misunderstandings and hopefully avoidable outcomes arise. So first of all, we have deficits in social emotional reciprocity. So this is recognizing an emotion that's directed towards you and responding in a way that makes sense. So somebody who you're calling their name or calling some kind of identifier and they just don't respond at all. It could be something like that. It could be not recognizing anxiety or fear or anger in another person and responding in a way that just seems off. There's a lot of behaviors here that could contribute to making people feel uncomfortable around you, or could make people around you angry because you're not acting in a way that neurotypical folks are assumed, yeah, that you would assume neurotypical folks would for act. So that can be a source of real misunderstanding. The next one here, deficits in nonverbal communication. I know that in my role, I am always paying attention to nonverbal communication, and hearkening back to 2 years ago, when we had training for the CIT from the CIT folks. I remember you all talking about nonverbal communication as well. So I know that you're thinking about this in your daily lives, and so not making eye contact, just doing strange things with your hands. All of these things are behaviors that go along with ASD and can contribute to law enforcement feeling uncomfortable or just unsure of what's going on in the interaction. The next domain here, this goes towards understanding various relationships, but for our purposes, what jumped out to me the most was understanding that it translating behaviors from one social context to another. So, for example, if someone at home has no boundaries, they're permitted to touch or investigate or see whatever they want or give hugs, it can be really difficult for them to understand that they're not allowed to do that in other situations, at Walgreens, for example, or one example I saw a couple times was being curious about all the gear that officers carry around with them on their belts, and reaching out to touch some of them. And obviously that's not safe at all. It really changes the course of an interaction. Those kind of things could be commonplace for somebody who has an autism spectrum disorder. I included this picture. Looks like it's ripped from the headlines somewhere. But obviously this is an interaction maybe not going so well. But with a little bit of understanding that sometimes loud noises are upsetting, there's sensitivity to them. Covering up your ears is a way to self-soothe or comfort. It's not a reaction to the person in front of them necessarily. It's an attempt to sort of internally regulate. As if that wasn't bad enough, there's a number of things that are often comorbid with ASD. I've highlighted a few here that are either very common or I think salient to our discussion. So intellectual disability, this can make things pretty difficult for a variety of reasons. And their estimates of prevalence are 45%, so very common. Motor abnormalities, slowed motor function, or abnormal motor function, or odd behaviors. Again, up to 79% of folks with ASD are also considered to have a motor abnormality. So this is, it plays back into that, making folks around them feel uncomfortable or real just difficulties in following commands, things like that. I didn't include it here, but there's also a significant, the prevalence of epilepsy is also quite prevalent with folks who have ASD, and tic disorders is on here. So two conditions that could produce rapid movements that aren't telegraphed. They could kind of come out of anywhere. Something that I could imagine being contribute to the kind of unease or trigger the reflexes of folks who are interviewing someone with autism spectrum disorder. Anxiety, also very prevalent, common in the general population. We know that this makes, I know that when I'm anxious, it slows my thinking down, and I'm sure that other folks here have had similar experiences. But when we think about the prevalence and the idea that this could also be at play when interacting with someone, that could create a lot of issues. Obsessive compulsive, if you're asking someone to come down off the porch and they have to touch all of the posts before they can get off the porch because otherwise their mom might die, that's something that could create a lot of difficulties. Again, quite common in this population. And then oppositional defiant disorder it's really all in the name. It can create a lot of difficulties for someone in a place of authority, trying to interact with someone who maybe needs to be spoken to in a different way, or is accustomed to being spoken to in a different way, and even has a diagnosis saying that they have trouble with authority. So what have people been doing about this? This is a recognized problem. It's common. It's widespread. I just wanted to bring it around to a little bit of a lighter place. So here's a picture from Arizona. Members of the community who have autism spectrum disorder meeting with police officers in Arizona. It's from April of this year. We can tell because no one's wearing masks. This is a news story from Needham, Massachusetts, my home state. First responders learning how to interact. This gentleman here he's actually a firefighter, but after his class, he realized that one thing he could do, or rather, he was rescuing a little boy, and the boy was running and screaming, and he realized he needed to give him a big hug so he could get him out of the burning house. So that was kind of sweet. Here's some efforts from Maryland. And here's another story from NPR. A mom who had brought her son into the emergency department, and the son was escalating, becoming very agitated. There was an off-duty safety officer there who, because of his own experience with individuals with autism, was able to help calm the boy down and kind of get him to be safe in that environment. I think the theme here is really education and practice, and just trying to help make folks aware of these behaviors and these deficits that are present. These are some resources I pulled together, some things I was looking at. Autism Speaks, the first one there. I just want to draw your attention to the top two, actually. So Autism Speaks was already mentioned today. This link has some very concrete examples of things to try or things to avoid, such as speaking clearly, being patient, using very simple, concrete language. And then they also bring up some of the challenges, such as body language or folks reaching for gear or other things on officers' person. And then the second link here, Madison House, they actually have about a 25-minute video specifically for law enforcement, trying to educate and provide some strategies about how to work with people who have autism. The other ones seem to have good information as well. That is the end of my talk. Happy to take any questions. I'll answer them as best I can.
Thanks, Dr. Wiley. Yeah, again, if anybody has questions, please now ask or forever hold your peace. We're going to give you a couple